All right, recording in progress. Welcome everyone. My name is Leslie Brill. I'm president of the Bronx River Sound Shore Audubon Society, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for our speaker program with Daniel Sullivan and Katelynn Cooper, the authors of the book Braving the Bronx River, a 23-mile kayak from Westchester to Rikers Island. We're thrilled to have them here tonight. And Bronx River, of course, is part of the name of our chapter, and we're all very interested in learning about what it's like to kayak this precious river we live near and bird at and are trying to protect. And we're interested in the natural elements, the social elements, and just the plain adventure of it. So I'm going to introduce our speakers by reading their bios, and then I'll turn it over to Daniel and Katelynn, and we'll have the opportunity for questions and answers at the end. As usual, you can type your comments into the chat also. So, Daniel Robert Sullivan,
Yeah.
actor, playwright, and educator.
I'm okay. I'm on a Zoom call.
Could someone please mute themselves?
You got it.
Can I call you tomorrow morning? Okay. Okay.
Okay, let's start over again. Daniel Robert Sullivan is an actor, playwright, and educator. He wrote the award-winning Prospect High, Brooklyn, produced worldwide, and Lockdown, Await Further Instructions, both praised for their compelling teenage characters. He is also the author of 3 books, Braving the Bronx River, Becoming a Jersey Boy, and A Liberal's Journey Through Conservative America, holding a dual MFA in acting and directing from UMKC. Daniel has been a master teaching artist at Roundabout Theater Company for over 2 decades. His acting credits include leading roles in Dear Evan Hansen, Jersey Boys, and Motown the Musical, as well as performances with top regional theaters. Katelynn Cooper is a project manager at VaynerMedia. Previously, she held a similar role at Known, working with clients such as Hulu, Max, and Rockefeller Center. Before a career in marketing, Katelynn served as a stage manager on Broadway and national tours for notable productions such as Dear Evan Hansen, My Fair Lady, Matilda, and School of Rock. Outside of work, Katelynn enjoys New York City history, river walks, dollar oyster happy hours, and the pursuit of the perfect deli sandwich. I'm with you on that one. We can talk about that later.
Forgot about that one.
We have our favorites here. So all are about to share their adventure with us. Without further ado, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen, and everyone, please kindly put yourselves on mute. Thank you.
If I may.
We have props.
New York City's only freshwater river coalesces from brooks and streams in Westchester County and dumps itself 23 miles south in the face of Rikers Island. This river is witness to more of our country's income inequality than its surrounding residents, stumbling and tumbling from its tributaries in one of New York's wealthiest districts to its mouth in the single poorest district in the entire United States. That's our Bronx River. It has a bad rap, yeah, polluted, sure, in some parts, full of tires and cars, it used to be, but these fleeting eras of negative human impact have not destroyed the things that make the Bronx River one of the most striking waterways in North America. Sky-high bluffs that encase a paddler on both sides, rocky waterfalls powerful enough to grind tobacco into snuff through the 19th century, countless deep channels hiding beaver and gargantuan carp, and an urban landscape that runs from pastoral to postapocalyptic. The Bronx River is an outdoor adventure seeker's paradise. It begins in prosperity and ends in America's most extreme poverty. And this is the first documented journey down its entire length. We are so very grateful to be here, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Dan, and this is Katelynn. Say hi, Katelynn.
Oh, hi, friends.
And this is our book. The reason we are here is simply because we were silly enough to think that traveling the entire length of the Bronx River in the course of one day, all 23 miles of it, even though it's only inches deep in many, many sections, we thought it was a silly enough idea to make for a fun day during COVID. And of course, because we're artists in nature and managers, we wanted to create a product, and this was the product. We are so grateful to be here because we've seen a lot of the other presentations that your chapter has put together, and most of them are from experts. Experts. We are not that.
No.
We are the ones who had a great day and a great time researching the things we were going to be seeing and taking pictures of the things we saw and putting it together into a book so that other people, hopefully, and mostly for me, I'll be honest with you, it's students. I talk about this book a lot in the Bronx with students. My hope is that a celebration of the Bronx River is happening one little bit more because we put together something tangible that people can see. So thank you. It means a lot to us that you all showed up just to hear us chat. This was our journey. It's rough. It's 23 miles. And we had some pretty poor kayaks, to be honest, in putting this together. They were not ideal. They weren't expert level, but nothing we do is expert level here. And I would encourage you, if you're looking at your screen right now, to make the screen as big as is comfortable for you, and make our faces as small as comfortable for you, because what you're going to experience over the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, is a lot of pictures, because we believe that the best way to experience the Bronx River is to simply see it.
And we look like this the entire time. So if we go small, that's really fun.
I told her she was the one who had to have the quips because I'm not a funny dude. Thank you for making a
You're
good quip. You
welcome.
got us started just great.
Yeah, thanks.
So we are here today because our kind host, Leslie, has a sister who wrote what is kind of an exquisite article about the project we put together. The article was published in the Scarsdale Enquirer, which
yeah, sadly is no longer with us, but we still have this article written by Leslie's sister as a wonderful memory of our adventure. And as people who love a project, we like any way we can actually document our projects.
Yeah. So we were invited to be here simply because Leslie heard about this book from her sister, and we are so grateful for that. So thank you. It's an exquisitely written article, far better than the words you'll find in our book. So my thanks, and let us begin. Chapter 1, the Westchester tributaries. For the next 40 minutes or so, you'll hear some reading of passages from our book and some stories about what happened to us that day. But mostly you'll see images of how beautiful this river that many of us already love can be. We hope that you will pick up a copy of the book and share it with people that you think might love the river too and want to see what it looks like from top to bottom. We also have an audiobook version, which will not have the casual banter that we're having now. But if you prefer to listen to things, but we actually encourage the book because it has so many pictures. The first of which is...
And what you'll see today is actually merely a selection of some of our favorites from the book. It's a wonderful book for children because of that visual element.
Oh, good call. Calling out the children. I like that.
Here for the kids.
This is what we determined was the beginning of the Bronx River on the day we jumped into it. I'll speak in a moment about how tricky it is to come up with the beginning of the Bronx River. But on the day in question, spring 2021, this was our launch point. It's a puddle of water that only fills after a significant rain, and there was significant rain in the 3 days prior to this adventure, and in fact, on this morning. You can see me wearing a poncho as I try to get my bearings. We are not experts at this, Although we are outdoor enthusiasts,
We are. Nothing about what we do would make you actually think we're experts. So we're not worried about you confusing that.
we just were having a good time. And that's the first image of me in the water. I believe, Katelynn, you were taking this picture from the shore. You still hadn't entered yet, yeah?
Yes, the original plan was that I would push you in and that I would just kind of figure it out on my own.
So our 23-mile adventure begins in this moment. I want to read you a little passage, if you don't mind, because it deals with how tricky it is to find the beginning of this river. The Bronx River doesn't appear to have a precise starting point. In the small hamlet of Valhalla, New York, a number of tributaries haphazardly scrape the landscape after a good rain. The barely noticeable streams and brooks coalesce, as far as we've been able to determine, behind the baseball diamond at Pat Henry Field. At what depth does a trickle become a river? At what width does an unnamed marsh become a named waterway? These answers may vary season to season and year to year, but in the spring of 2021, the Bronx River first becomes visible just over the fence beyond first base at latitude 41.066670. It is here where I've stashed the kayaks in secret, using the river's already steep banks as camouflage until we enter the water at tomorrow's dawn. The river's beginning was not always such a nebulous one. It was the building of the massive Kensico Dam in 1917 that walled off the Bronx River's proper origin and left scattered tributaries to find their own way. Flooding the valley to create a reservoir displaced the residents of Kensico Village, a community of 200 residents whose property was condemned, appraised, paid off, and then burned. The charred remains of homes, a hotel, and even a train station were buried beneath 30 billion gallons of water, destined for the ever-growing New York City metropolis 23 miles to the south. And thus, the sort of social concerns around the Bronx River begin right away in its history. But take in this beauty for a moment, would you?
And it's rather hidden, the beginning parts. It's really just behind homes, behind parks that don't even have a proper river walk behind it. And if you like wine and food, the Westchester Wine and Food Festival actually takes place in the shadow of the Kensico Dam.
That's right.
I eventually got in. I believe I just scooted forward until like gravity won. Forgive me, I am not as eloquent as Dan. I'm here for it's okay, it's okay. I'm here for the witty repartee and the fun stories. If you haven't figured out, I have a little bit more of a type A personality, which is hard to believe considering this is Daniel Robert Sullivan over here. One of our biggest challenges when we first got into the river, and we really didn't know much about this, is that there were a handful, more than a handful of fallen trees, possibly because there were storms just back to back the day before we got into the river itself. Now, with a trunk blockading our way on the river, there are two options. You either go up or you go over. Going around portaging was not an option at this time because every part of the banks was all just pricker bushes. I mostly chose to go under if I could shimmy my way underneath. However, Dan insisted on going over. The reason I decided to go under as much as I could is, and you can very well see it here, is even though it was an early spring day in New York City, it was raining and it was cold. It was very cold. From my understanding, growing up in upstate New York near Buffalo, you do not want to get your limbs cold because that's actually going to make your entire body cold. So I made a very concerted effort to not get my feet wet. Dan gave up not getting his feet wet probably within the first 20 minutes of us being in the river. It's really fun to do it that way, but I have a feeling Dan's feet were hurting a bit more than mine were.
Yes, I still have a smile on in this picture, so I couldn't have been too cold yet, but it was certainly getting there. This is the kind of experience at the top of the Bronx River. Kudos to you, Katelynn, for looking determined as you get through there.
Yeah, barely.
And this is getting towards the end of what we would call the first section. The Westchester tributaries is how we've named this chapter because it was hard to find the specific beginning of what we call a river. But here is a clear moment of when it totally coalesces. And of course, the structure around it says, this is the Bronx River. Chapter 2, as we enter North Castle, which of course many of you are familiar with, gets a little bit more beautiful. This morning looks so sunshiny from this picture, but trust, the rain was coming.
As you can see by our ponchos in
We had-
attempts to keep dry.
Yeah, a sad attempt to keep dry, but that's Katelynn going under an obstacle that I probably chose to go over. That, I believe, is a rescued paddle.
Yes, you also had the habit of anytime you went over a trunk, you would just like let your paddle go, and I would have to go and rescue the paddle.
That's also very true. You'll check the beauty of this picture, but also the rain, which will become important to our story soon. The beauty of this, though, take that in for a second. This is a part of the river that normally folks are not in or on. In that sense, we felt like we were pioneers of one section.
That one was difficult. I think that one we ended up picking up and kind of, what is it, the Macarena, it while holding it up.
I'd like to read a passage if you don't mind. It just wasn't supposed to be this cold. It's unseasonably cold. It's nature playing a dangerous game with us. This adventure was dreamed up on a midwinter eve and imagined to be sun-kissed and inspirational. Now, in the northernmost section of the Bronx River, we are drenched in mud, and I'm questioning my resilience. Is Katelynn questioning it too? 23 miles are ahead of us, and our goal feels unreachable. It was so hot last week, I didn't want to leave the apartment, and now this? That's Katelynn's voice. I wonder if Katelynn is making small talk or if this is to elicit a response, for I have not spoken up in a while. How are you doing up there? My ice-white feet are worrying me. That's how I'm doing up here. How are your feet? She cries out. Well, she must have figured it out. I haven't felt my toes in quite some time. I think we should pull over and reassess, she says. I can't answer my own agreement as my jaw has begun to shake and chatter so strongly that my mouth cannot form the words. And is that a turtle over there? No, I'm hallucinating. Does cold make a person hallucinate? We push up against the next obstacle, jump out of our kayaks, and wade through a rain-swelled swamp to decide an emergency course of action. I am, at this point, literally too cold to speak. The sun has barely risen, but the rain clouds block its aid. Disappointed? No, it's more than that. I feel like a failure. Because with weeks of anticipation about to be tossed aside, when the pre-dawn cold was the one thing we had not planned for. Only when we've pulled ourselves through the swamp and onto the pathway of a nearby park do I see an absolute change in Katelynn's demeanor. Younger and more fit than I, she'd been fulfilling her check-in duties in the first couple miles of our all-day journey, but now, out of the water, her teeth are beginning to crackle in much the same way as mine. Her shoulders start to shake, convulse even, and at least now I know I won't be alone in my fear of giving up. I say, I think we have to stop. Words of reason. And I can't manage to speak anymore. Failure is imminent. There's a train station not far from this park. It's the only structure in sight, and it's there that we place our hopes of warming up. Our inadequate layers are soaked through, and our ponchos have now become ripped to shreds. Failure? Maybe. We didn't make it without stopping. But with 23 miles of urban river that has never been documented from source to mouth, this is too good an adventure on which to give up. We will simply have to try again because we can do anything.
That's right.
We did have to pause
Yeah.
significantly to warm up. That is, I suppose, the low point of our journey.
That was definitely the low point, but you know, bless the train station. That wasn't actually that warm, but offered us enough coverage that we could kind of dry off a bit and get our bearings.
And move on. And get our bearings, we did. Sunshine.
Yeah, it was wonderful this part of the day. We truly were so disheartened. We were talking about just like, you know what, let's just get on the Metro North and go home. We're not going to be able to do it. But luckily, about an hour passed and the sun started to come out. So we shuffled our little selves over to where we had stored the kayaks and took them out of the storage where we had locked them up just in case we did have to leave them, and unlocked them and got back in. And as you can see here, it is not cold at all. One of the wonderful miracles of the Northeast in the summer is that it can go from freezing and cold and wet to sunshine and like high 70s, low 80s. We were ready to get back in that water and really have some fun.
These sights will start to become familiar to a few of you that we spoke with earlier. But how many times have you been able to do something like this? I love it.
This is also the area where it really starts to look like a river. Initially, in the first couple chapters of the book, you'll notice that we sometimes have to drag our kayaks along, or paddling is quite difficult because it's fairly shallow. This is where it's really starting to feel like a river.
Mm-hmm. And we enter the region of White Plains.
I have skills. Not many, but
Those of you who know this area probably have walked around some of the trails, or a fair amount of trails here. But to think about sort of downtown White Plains and the fact that such beauty exists in this little valley of the river.
this is where the river starts to be much more open to the public as well. There's starting to be trails and bridges that are very pedestrian friendly.
One of my favorite parts was having a little bit of adventure in what I would call the mini rapids, like you see there. Just mini, but fun nonetheless. Some visitors. These were perhaps the first people that we saw during our adventure, and they were quite surprised. They'd never seen somebody traverse this part of the river before. It's fairly accessible up here, fairly. But they had never seen anybody do it.
We probably got a little lucky with the rain the previous days, making it more easily paddled.
You're showing off your muscles a little bit there, babes.
No, thanks. Yeah.
One of my favorite pictures because it's so beautiful and the sun is now rising. You can probably guess that at this point, even though we have many miles ahead, we started thinking about how long it was taking for us to get places, because we had to take the significant amount of time to warm up for safety. Now we are starting to wonder, will we actually be able to make it to the end of the river? 20 miles ahead of us or something.
But with warmer bodies, we also start to move faster.
Truth. A passage. If there's one sure thing about the Bronx River, it's that the moments of peace will always be followed by a test, not unlike life, eh? The test here is how to approach our largest impediment yet. The banks of this section are more overgrown than most. Prickers and poison ivy fill the slippery slopes on both sides. The tree itself is larger than most, preventing any travel underneath it. The limbs protrude high into the sky, making a climb over the tree nearly impossible, so we pause to think it out. Not even close to our halfway point, but already having overcome the challenge of severe cold, we are simply not willing to let another difficult moment put a stop to us. Our mantra for endurance must be repeated. We can do anything. If we can't go around that tree, and we can't go under that tree, and we can't go over that tree, perhaps we can go through that tree. And through that tree we went.
I believe the motto was kayak first to give us space.
Truth. It was. Another section that we've defined as the Battle Hill section because we were fascinated by the history here.
In White Plains, if you're familiar at all with American history, one of the most formative battles of the American Revolution was the Battle of White Plains, which actually a significant portion of the battle itself took place across the Bronx River. In fact, there's a whole slew of historical documents where soldiers mention running up the Bronx River to get away from the British soldiers. And if you know anything about American history, that was not a battle that favored the Patriots. However, it was a formative time in the war itself. And you can just imagine, you can see the Native American name for the river was Aquahung, which means the river of high bluffs. And that became very apparent as we got further and deeper into the river as the bluffs did become very high. And I could imagine being a soldier not being able to get to the high ground, which from all the war movies I've seen, that seems like a good idea.
Truth. We come to one of the less attractive but fairly useful sections of the Bronx River, and it's these trash collecting devices. Now, I admit, because we led with the fact that we are not experts in any of this, just adventurers. I admit I don't know the name of this device, but sure, it is effective in collecting the trash at the end of each section of the river. Of course, we did not go through this trash, we went around it. But it wouldn't be the first time we had to do this thing. Pushing along forward into the section of the book anyway, that we've still chosen to call the Battle Hill section, mostly because we wanted to be reminded of the history that you were just talking about and how significant it was.
Yeah, there are parts of this this battle and this part of American history that still resonate with us today. If you're anything like most people, you love Halloween. And one of the most classic American tales is the tale of the Headless Horseman. And you're like, Katelynn, that takes place in Sleepy Hollow, which is really far away from the Bronx River. And I'm just going to be like, okay, technically, sure, maybe, yeah. But according to common lore, a Hessian, which is a German soldier hired by the British Army, lost his head in a battle, which feels fairly easy to do with all those cannonballs bouncing about. And his head rolled down the hill of Chatterton Hill and landed in Sleepy Hollow, and thus began the tale of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like Washington Irving got it wrong because it's just too darn far away. I don't see how a head could get lopped off, roll down Chatterton Hill, and make it all the way to Sleepy Hollow. I just don't see how that's possible.
Well, you didn't write that book.
We move into Scarsdale. This will be an area of the river that many of you are more familiar with because it's a little bit more visible, although you will still not see boats in it, hardly ever. And this is one of the reasons why, is because there's a few waterfalls in Scarsdale. They are beautiful. They, of course, help the river structurally make its way down south. But what it means is that there's not a lot of people on the river like we were. We, of course, portaged around this waterfall. But you can see why it's not necessarily the place people want to get on a kayak.
Yes, the high bluffs have made themselves quite known here.
Check this out. This is a great historical photograph, and I want to speak on it for just a moment. This photograph is owned at this moment by the Scarsdale Library. It's a photograph of the Bronx River Powder Company, a mill that had the dangerous task of producing gunpowder here for almost 30 years during the mid-1800s. A small dam on this brook along the Bronx River held back water in a mill pond just behind it. The mill pond was fed by the river, and the dam released water back into the river a little further downstream. The Powder Company is one of the first examples of the river being used for industry, and thus was a gateway to the unfortunate pollution that would follow. 4 grinding mills at this location made gunpowder that was used in the Mexican War in 1846 and dynamite for railroad building all over New York, the Bronx, and Westchester counties. It was dangerous business. Just a few blocks away, there are 3 grave sites of men that died from blasts here. The gravestones literally say, carved into the stone, they died from gunpowder exploding. So we respect those 3 folks who died from blasts here as we pass by this location. This high bluff is a reminder of
It's
the
the traditional name of the Aquahan.
River of High Bluffs. Perhaps a little moment of danger when we saw an electrical wire of some kind moving into the river. I will say that we never recommend people take a journey like this because it's true that for both reasons of contamination in the river and other physical dangers, that it might not be the most safe thing to do. But it was a time when, well, it was the COVID times for us, and we wanted an adventure. So we took a little bit of a risk. That's true. But you can see this cord hanging in the water. Still not sure what it was, but we steered clear of it.
Yes, we're here to tell you our tale, not to encourage you to do it. Just a nice little legal disclaimer.
Yes, that's true. When I talk about this book with students, I say, I want you to get down to the river. I want you to look at the river. I want the river to be a part of your life. I never say necessarily I want you to get on the river, because that is admittedly not necessarily always the safest thing to do. You can see this section is filled with gorgeous waterfalls, some of which we have to climb on over.
This one was easy, though. That was fine.
What a beautiful path rising above the river. And a little fall off there. That, of course, we can portage around. Beautiful scenery in this section.
You've heard us use the word portage a couple times. I'm sure you've gleaned its meaning in context, but for those of you who don't know, that's when you get your kayak out of the water and move around an impossible barrier to get back into the river.
My friend from earlier, Tuckahoe, we've arrived. And thank goodness Scarsdale is doing a solid by collecting the garbage before we move down into Tuckahoe. A little bit more violent, a little bit more beautiful. Let's share an old story from history. This is a good one. According to the New York Times on June 30th, 1932, there are the jungles of the Bronx River right here. It's a wide section with 2 waterways to choose from, an island in between them, and a brook to the right that drains the waters of Crestwood Lake. It's here that neighborhood boys of the era reported seeing a swarm of alligators swimming about, even bringing a dead specimen into the local police station as evidence. The police took their report quite seriously. As documented in the New York Times, 2 patrolmen of the Westchester County Parkway Police will leave here at dawn tomorrow on an expedition along the jungles of the Bronx River to capture alligators for the Bronx Zoo. The police explorers plan to fight their way down to the river to Crestwood Lake, where native boys reported seeing recently that reptiles had been sporting in the water. Skimming across the top of these waters in our topsy-turvy sea kayaks, I'm looking around for any sign that the old reports might be valid. The police never actually found any alligators here, Katelynn reminds me. I clarify with skepticism, revising her words and repeating them back to her. The police supposedly never found any alligators here.
And as people who spent a lot of time in Florida, we we're a little skeptical. All right, so this section of the river goes straight through town. This is where we see more people than we've seen since we first started. And for the most part, the people we saw since the beginning were either curious or just kind of supportive. I will say here, and this is my story to tell, there was one gentleman here who felt the very, very strong urge to reprimand us for doing this and tell us that we were going to need to get out because we were never going to make it. Not one to stand down from a challenge. So So I pretty much told him that we were going to do it and we were going to do it and it was going to be just fine. And he said we weren't going to be able to get around this one, I believe you have a photo coming up, one waterfall. And I proved him wrong and I literally just waved him goodbye.
This was the obstacle he
This was
was
the
quite
obstacle.
sure we would not get past, but you are managing that obstacle quite easily. Oh, and I think that's the gentleman. We have a picture of him.
Yes.
Oh, I hope it's nobody we know.
Hope they're not on the call. Sorry. I'm not that sorry. I could do it.
This section of the river has lots of fun rapids, as I like to call them, mini rapids. But we move on swiftly into Mount Vernon. Again, the river moves faster here.
Well, it certainly helped us with our speed. We had time to make up after all. If we have a picture of your house, feel free to let us know.
So gorgeous.
I think this is one of my favorite parts of the river.
We move in to the Twin Towns, as we like to refer to them, getting closer to our home in the Bronx, closer ever still. Woodlawn is a place we visit often.
Love Woodlawn.
On the other side, of course, is Wakefield. And this is where I'm inclined to tell you that, yes, I brought a bottle of wine with me and some snacks because I thought, stupidly, that we would have time to have a little bit of a picnic lunch along our 23-mile journey.
So much time on our hands. We were just gonna like stop and have a picnic. It'd be totally fine.
So, a bit of lunacy, perhaps, but the ridiculousness of bringing a bottle of wine on a kayak journey is, well, something I need to read to you about. This is where I've decided to make a toast, in part to be funny and in part to be fancy. I brought along a bottle of Chardonnay from a recent adventure we had in the Finger Lakes. Packing the wine was a bit of overt optimism. I really did think there would be time to drink it in celebration sometime today, but now, realizing that there will not be a relaxed moment, I'm opting for a quick toast. There's a certain whimsy to carrying a bottle of wine for 14 miles through freezing rain and waist-deep dowsing and tree blockades and poison ivy, and I am about to enjoy a blithe moment. Dan, do we have time for that? Katelynn has caught me spinning around to see why I've paused. I'm toasting to making it more than halfway and to one of our favorite neighborhoods. This is true. We have both Irish heritage, so Woodlawn has become one of our favorite neighborhoods in the Bronx. I'm feeling closer to home now that we've arrived here, but also I just want a swig of wine, and Katelynn has eaten all of my snacks. Wine is all I have left. That's right. I was kind enough to give you almost all of my snacks.
I think I left you a Cliff Bar.
Again, promoting the fact that we are silly adventurers trying to have a great day in a great area of the city without enough preparation to know how long it would actually take.
Yeah, I believe we calculate that it would take us 9 hours. And I think my calculations are correct. It took us more like 14.
Sunrise to sunset.
A little before sunrise, but yeah.
Again, a close-up view of what the towns are doing to protect the river, cleansing out the plastic trash, the floating trash, we should say, periodically.
It's like a Brita filter every couple miles.
Like a Brita filter every couple of miles. That was good. Oh, an explosion of life. On the East Bank, people, and they're waving. This is 228th Street and Bronx Boulevard in the northern section of Shoelace Park, and residents fill every nook and cranny on the bluff above. This is the first large group of people that we've seen yet. Most shout as we glide by, as surprised to see boats on the water as we are to see so many supportive strangers. Then we pass a dock built over the eastern shore, and we note another significant marker in our journey. We are at the New York City Parks and Recreation Department's first official kayak and canoe launch at Shoelace Park. This is the northernmost sanctioned launch site on the Bronx River. Please note the enormity of the fact that we are 9 chapters through a 19-chapter journey, and we are just now reaching the first official launch site.
Use a little TLC.
Good. Permits are required to boat on any section of the Bronx River. We had permits, but for clarity, the permits allow certain entrance points. This is the first one. Up in Valhalla, there are no official entrance points. One might say that makes this against the rules, but that's a bit nebulous.
It's in the gray area.
Such a beautiful section. And now, getting a little bit more busy, we enter the Gun Hill Road section.
You like beer? The Gun Hill Brewery makes fantastic beer.
You look so happy in that photograph.
I'm a delight. I don't know what to tell you.
Ah, this is a good one. If you'll indulge. The French section of the Bronx. Appearing as no more than an ordinary park and playground, but with a large sign proclaiming it French Charlie's Playground. Writer John McNamara describes it as the former grounds of a French restaurant in which French Charlie Mangan was the proprietor in the 1890s. New York City Parks and Recreation Department offers a little bit more, stating this playground honors the memory of Charlie Mangan, who owned nearby French restaurant in the 1890s. His establishment centered the small French enclave of the Bronx and was properly referred to as French Charlie's. French Charlie's was beautified in 1941, but by the 1960s, it was being used for other purposes. A blog titled 180 Days in New York City offers a fascinating character study from that time. Wilfredo was a smart kid who hung around with an assortment of characters growing up in the 1960s, and it being the Bronx, this assortment of characters included some folks who messed around and got into some trouble, mostly as a gang called the Wanderers. And French Charlie's was one of those places where those sorts of guys hung out. Well, it was when they hung out when they wanted to make a little trouble with the Ducky Boys, the Fordham Baldies. In a classic Bronx voice, undulled by a couple of decades on Long Island at this point, he told me on one of our tours of the old neighborhood, when we had a beef with another gang, we'd go down to French Charlie's over there in the park to settle it. So French Charlie's began as a French enclave of fancy French restaurants, and at least by the 60s, was a place where when you had a beef with another gang, you could settle it.
Actually, the French Charlie's original restaurant, Mark Twain ate there once.
Mark Twain ate at French Charlie's original restaurant.
Yeah.
Mark Twain, a gentleman who loves a river, that's for sure.
Sure does love a river, that Samuel Clemens.
The swimming hole. What a classic picture of this. We were never able to determine who used this tire. A tire swing on the Bronx River, but not too far beyond it. An old-fashioned swimming hole.
This was actually amazing. We did not expect to come across people actually using the river in the ways that it had been used over 100 years ago. This is an amazing experience to come across this group of folks on a Sunday afternoon with coolers and grills. And when we went through this section, kids pulled on our kayak and we were able to pull some kids along on the kayaks. It was a really beautiful experience and a great showcase of community in the Bronx.
And check out this picture again from the Scarsdale Library of when the river was used, I might say properly, for swimming.
Mhm.
Because these are areas we know a little bit more, and all of you probably know a little bit more, I'll start to move a little bit quicker through the botanical garden section, a formal portage site where they require you to take your canoe out of the water.
Like we didn't.
But this is the part of the water that we missed. Because they forced us to take the kayak out of the water, we missed some interesting rapids. Ah, the snuff mill.
This is a beautiful historic building that you can still visit today in the Botanical Gardens. I would like to point out the New York Botanical Gardens are the one in the Bronx. In 1792, this was built as a mill for snuff, which obviously is tobacco for those who do not know. However, there's still a bit of a history here that we see every single day. The famous ingredient to this snuff was actually rose petals. And if you've ever been able to visit the New York Botanical Gardens, the Rockefeller Rose Garden is really just just beyond this. It's right across the street from the snuff mill. So that portion of the history remains clear and steadfast.
Arguably, being in the botanical garden, it's one of the most beautiful sections to travel through. We move to the Bronx Zoo, where again, we're required to get out of the water, portaging around a big hill. And this is where it's important to mention that yes, there was a panther that was shipped to the Bronx Zoo, chewed through his wooden encasement, and and was never seen again, according to the New York Times.
Are you sure?
Oh, we found him.
We found him. He's
Oh, well
here.
done. That's Barty the cat. He's really cute, but he looks like a panther. We call him a panther. This is a real story. According to the New York Times, a panther was shipped to the Bronx Zoo in, do I have the year here? Oh, I don't know. It was 1902. 1902. Panther shipped to the Bronx Zoo in a wooden box, chewed through the wooden box overnight, disappeared around the Bronx River, and was never seen again. This according to the Times, 1902. This is an important thing we wanted to mention. Whether you've listened to me this entire time or not doesn't necessarily matter, but I beg you to listen to this one. This is an important story that I think everybody should know about. We should mention Ata Benga. Ata Benga was a 23-year-old from Africa who was kidnapped from his home country by slave traders, purchased by an American named Samuel Phillips Werner, and then displayed behind iron bars in the monkey house of the Bronx Zoo. This was 1906, and 250,000 New Yorkers visited the ghastly display in a single month. The sign at the zoo read, in part, "Brought from the Kasai River, Congo Free State, South Central Africa by Dr. Samuel Werner, exhibited each afternoon during September." This, of course, is a real man, exhibited each afternoon. The Bronx Zoo actively promoted the display, but so did the mayor, many scientists, and even the New York Times. Finally, following protests led by a group of local ministers, Mayor McLennan was finally convinced to release Mr. Benga to the care of the Colored Orphan Asylum in Brooklyn. The home was charged in helping Mr. Benga return to life as a free man, so what did they do? Katelynn asked on a tirade, and rightly so. I responded, well, they didn't send him home to Africa. I know that. That's right. She said, you know where they sent him to live as a free man? Lynchburg, Virginia. The irony astounds me. Mr. Ata Benga exhibited in a cage at the Bronx Zoo 43 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, 38 years after the 13th Amendment, was sent to Lynchburg with just a few new clothes and a job offer from a local tobacco company. There was little support for him educationally, save for a few English lessons, and no support for him at all mentally. He wanted to get back home to Africa, but Mr. Benga appears to have been prevented from doing so due to the extreme cost and the outbreak of World War I. Battling depression in Virginia, he took his own life in 1916. And that display of a man in a cage at the Bronx Zoo is the real history from the Bronx Zoo. I'll reverse a slide just to mention that that's a fish ladder for those that do a bit of fishing and like the upstream spawning. This is, of course, a method for the fish to come upstream when we're all moving downstream.
Actually, one of the easier portages. They kind of built a little ramp for us unknowingly.
The Cross Bronx Expressway section, a section that we needed to mention as a full chapter in the book because of its importance in Bronx history.
This is one of the most interesting parts of the Bronx history and the Bronx River history for me. In the 1970s, a magnificent woman named Ruth Anderberg petitioned so deeply and passionately to get the river cleaned up that and no one would do it. And when she went to the city council, they were like, fine, you go do it. And so she did. And you'll see back in the previous photo how the banks of the river are being held up by tires. One of the biggest problems that the river has experienced in its health is the massive bank erosion. That it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually hurts a lot of the animals. It makes it impossible to get in and out. So Ruth did what any woman will do. She will use the resources around her. So she took all of the tires out of the river and made a new bank. And it's actually allowed fish to spawn and bird nests to be made again.
I like that one. We're getting down into an area that might look familiar to a lot of you.
I think this is the closest we are to home, too.
Oh yeah, in fact, this exact passage must be passing under Tremont.
Under Tremont, yeah.
Which is very close to where we were living at the time.
Yes.
And what inspired this whole adventure. We might take a pause to say that we were inspired to do this simply because we were living very close to the Bronx River and had never touched it.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
We would walk near it, but you could never actually get down to it. There's no real proper river path until you get a little bit further south or further north. But this is a kind of a dead zone when it comes to river access.
Now, I know my audience here, so I know that I don't need to explain to you the history of the Cross Bronx Expressway and Robert Moses and the insistence on putting it where he put it. But that's your first glimpse of it right there. And as you can see on the screen, it has been argued that the Cross Bronx Expressway created poverty in every neighborhood it touched due to decreased home values. That was the specific reason. It bisected the Bronx into north and south. And of course, it's still a traffic nightmare regardless, those of you who commute.
Yes.
An old, slightly blurry, but effective picture of the Cross Bronx Expressway being carved out, bisecting the Bronx.
As we all know, Robert Moses is a formidable figure in New York City history. However, this large pole, large stanchion, actually shows one moment of opposition to Robert Moses. Now, Mr. Moses wanted to connect the Cross Bronx Expressway to the Sheridan Expressway, and the only way to do that would be to cross the Bronx River itself. The project itself, the construction did start. That's what you see here. However, there was so much public opposition that this is where it ended. So this is a small reminder that you can see right before Starlight Park of the public winning against a continuation of the Cross Bronx Expressway.
I love it. A remnant that has never been taken down.
Yeah.
And of course, Starlight Park. Many of you will know this park, but how exciting to have it coming back alive again currently as we speak. Starlight Park has gone through an expansion process, a cleanup process over the past decade. It's now going to extend the greenway is extending even further.
And
so
it's
this
home
is
to the
exciting
Bronx
times.
River House.
Yeah, the Bronx River House, which I think we probably will see or close to it.
Yeah, it's right up there.
Yeah. So this Starlight Park, many of you might have already know this, but the park was built for an international exposition of science, arts, and industries in 1918. But here's what's interesting. It was meant to show off the newly formed Bronx County while also being used to attract foreign trade to the country after the war. This is 1918. But you know how many countries actually signed up to make a display at this exposition? The answer is one. It was Brazil. So the exposition that you see on the screen and the reason Starlight Park was built was not a winner, was an absolute failure, actually. But New Yorkers being what they were, they built this instead on its location. That, friends, is Starlight Park in its heyday.
I would have gone if it was just Brazil. They have good foods.
You can tell what time of day it is. We're getting close to the end of our journey and entering Concrete Plant Park region. It's golden hour, so the pictures get a little bit prettier. We must say we were taking all of these pictures with just our iPhones, not professional photographers, but boy, we were glad to capture some around this area.
iPhone did not sponsor us.
Talk about our favorite. Yeah.
This is one of my favorite stories. It really shows the true guts and chutzpah of the Bronx community and Bronx women themselves. So this lovely, courageous woman, Sarah Titus, in 1857, her husband died. Her husband had been the master of the bridge. You know, back in those days, you to get boats underneath, you would need to toot your horn and call ahead, and you would actually have to crank up the drawbridge. Now, when her husband died, she took over the job, and she took over the job for the next 50 years until he died. She never took a single day off, and in fact, the only way you could get the key away from her was literally to wake her up, because she slept with the key to the drawbridge under her pillow.
I love that. She's a person we both admired very much and wanted to include her story.
I like the tenacity, and the bridge is still there itself. It doesn't operate as a drawbridge anymore, but you can see how it definitely once did.
And of course, this Concrete Plant Park, and another significant barrier for us.
That one was a bummer. This is where you start to feel like you're really in the city.
That's true. We move to Soundview. The history of Soundview is one that I understand many of you will already know because of this chapter of the society. We have an extensive sort of researched piece about the indigenous people of this area and the conflict that existed between the indigenous people and some of the first New Yorkers to settle this area. I won't go into all of it now, but suffice it to say, there was violence and conflict for so many years that it seems to reflect the conflict of the Bronx itself. We're coming towards the end of our journey, of course. You know the map. You know that the river starts to get quite big as you move out into the Sound.
Quite deep.
And one might not even call it the river anymore, but we do as we get to Hunts Point. This is an area of the city that I find just absolutely fascinating.
And you can't speak about the Bronx River in any way, shape, or form without mentioning that it is a pillar of industry. And we mentioned that earlier when it was the mills for snuff, for powder. Nowadays, the industrial hub is actually at Hunts Point for multitudes of food manufacturers, multitudes of large trucks. It's not an area that's easy to get to, but if you are ever there, it feels like an industrial playground.
Truth. Darkness is approaching. Let me mention this. Not far from here was perhaps the greatest tragedy on any New York City river that ever occurred. In 1904, it was the passenger steamship, the General Slocum, which was taking mostly women and children out for a day on the North Shore of Long Island. A fire broke out on board, and though not terribly far from shore, and not terribly far from this place, few could be rescued. And on that day, more than 1,000 New Yorkers perished, a single incident death toll that the U.S. didn't surpass until September 11th, 2001. That was 1904, the General Slocum. We're approaching our final point.
Land.
Land. And just as the sun is setting, a passage. There is our landing spot ahead, I write. A small section of sand waiting for us to pull up on it. We've made it. We're home. Home in the Bronx. We began our kayak journey in one of the richest districts in the state, Westchester County's District 17, and we end in the absolute poorest district in America, Bronx County's District 15. Over the course of 15 hours,
15.
We have traveled a nearly straight waterway that stumbles and tumbles from prosperity to our country's most extreme poverty. And with that, we pull ashore
It's
and are
dark
greeted
now. We just got out right before it was fully dark.
and are greeted by the greatest piece of graffiti or a sign that we could, just across the street from our exit point, where we read, "You can do it." I finished the book by saying, way back at the beginning, this journey almost ended prematurely. The cold forced us to almost give up. Later, disheartenment forced us to almost give up. At the first failure, we wrote down, "We didn't make it this time, but with 23 miles of urban river that has never been documented from source to mouth, this is too good an adventure on which to give up. We will simply have to try again because we can do anything, or so we hope." Today, I'm thinking that we really can do anything. So what's next? And that, friends, is, oh yes, thank you, is our story of the Bronx River. And we are so grateful to have been given the opportunity to share that with you. I wish I had tons of free copies to give out to all of you. I just don't have them. But I would hope that you would share anything you learned about the Bronx River and your enthusiasm for it with folks, especially younger folks. And thank you. We will, of course, at Leslie's discretion, entertain any questions or commentary that you might want to have. And we are very grateful to have spent some time with you this evening.
Yes, thank you for your time. And I see a couple questions have already popped up in the chat. Dan, can you speak to
Where can we buy the book?
Oh, you can buy it anywhere books are sold, but the easiest, of course, is on Amazon these days. We have an audiobook version there as well, paperback and hardcover.
Give the title again.
Braving the Bronx River.
Okay.
Thank you so very much for asking.
I'll buy it.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Thank you so much. I am just sitting here wrapped, totally absorbed and fascinated by your presentation. The river is a focal point for the natural history, society history, the story of our lives. I know I have my own personal history with the Bronx River and fighting its pollution. And I mean, I have a whole bunch of questions. If anyone would like to speak their question before I read questions from the chat, please go ahead.
I just want to say it was a fabulous program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Incredibly kind.
Unmute yourself if you're going to speak.
Hi, I'm a docent at the New York Botanical Garden, and one of the tours that my friend and I developed was the history and ecology of the Bronx River. And I've got lots of old photographs. This took us a few years to put together. But the interesting thing is that the mill was built in 1840. It's both a New York City and national landmark. But there were two previous mills on the Bronx River. And when you had to take your canoes out to portage in that portion, were you able to see the original dam that was there? It's a wooden dam, and it's about 2 feet under the water behind the current dam.
No, probably not, because the water was very deep that day and very flowing. But maybe we have seen it in the past.
I don't know if we clocked that there was a wooden dam there. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's at 100. I have a photograph of it. It's kind of falling apart now, but that
She's
was
a real expert.
that was the original. That was the original dam. Yeah,
That's fascinating. And again, just
two more things, because I'll forget them. The other thing is a lot of the animals at the Bronx Zoo died because of all the bleach. The Bolton bleachery was located there, and they've had, spread the sheets out, etc. So they lost some, I don't want to say a lot, but they lost rhinos and hippos. But the other thing is there's a fabulous exhibit at the New York Historical in Manhattan on Robert Cairo and what he did. On Robert Cairo, who wrote a book about why am I losing it? The man who destroyed the Bronx.
Yeah,
Robert Moses.
Robert
Yes.
Moses.
About
Yeah,
Robert
the man who
Moses.
destroyed the Bronx. Yes.
Fabulous exhibit, and they've had a couple of interviews that might be available online with Robert Cairo. That was really, really good. I have to read that book.
that's wonderful.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, listen, it says Claire Gorman. That's my much better half. But I'm just going to ask the question. I was the one who talked about the Bronx before you started. Here's my question for both of you. So who was the first one who came up with this insane idea? And how did it happen? Did one of you just turn to the other and say, hey, why don't we do this? I mean, I'm just curious, that's all.
I feel like it may have been your idea, but you want to tell the story?
I do know the origin story, and it was
Oh,
ridiculous.
okay.
So truthfully, it's COVID times. We had too much time on our hands. There wasn't a lot of public interaction, and I had read an account of a couple of adventurous gentlemen who took an inflatable raft down a portion of the Bronx River, the southern portion, and it popped, and they wrote a great article about it. It was very funny, and I said, "Wow, the Bronx River is right down the street from where we live. We've never touched it. Where does it begin?" I started Googling. And then I said, well, let me read about who's traveled down it. Nobody has traveled down it. Checked with the Historical Society. No documented records of people traveling down it. And I said,
In one day.
Oh.
People have been on it for a long time.
I said, I just have to touch it. We have had lots of outdoor adventures
Yes.
together. During COVID, we did a bit of traveling around. We'd been down south and we wanted to kayak out to see dolphins, but we got scared and came back. We were up in Maine and it got too cold, and so we gave up. And this was just another adventure that was outdoors. I said, I want to do it. I don't know how to plan for it. She's the planner. She planned everything. She did a lot of research for us so that we knew what to look for along the way. And that's the long and short of it.
Well, thanks. Thanks for enlightening. I appreciate it.
Was
Thank
there
you for
any place
being
that was too shallow to paddle at all, where you just had to give up and
Yeah, just kind of drag them along. Like anything like less than about 4 inches, you really just have to drag the kayaks. Like our weight alone was just scraping across the bottom, so it was just easier to get out. I grew up in upstate with lots of lakes, so I knew one of the first things I wanted to make sure I had was water shoes, so I could walk in the water without any issues.
Sure. Did they let you bring a kayak on Metro North? Just thinking about your stop
I
at the
have a
train
question.
station.
I have a question.
Sandy,
I have a question.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Sandy.
Can you get me?
Yes.
How do you said you had to have a permit. Of course, I want to do this. How do you get that permit? What was that about? Getting a
Wonderful.
permit. I'm a
It's
kayaker.
wonderful. It's so very easy. And
Am I frozen?
Yep. No, you're fine, Miss Morrissey. If you can hear me, it's very easy. You go to any Parks and Rec office and simply fill out a handwritten application. They didn't have an online application at the time of in 2021, but a handwritten application at any New York City Parks and Recreation Department, and you pay a nominal fee of maybe $20 or something
Okay,
to obtain a permit.
Cool.
Okay, we're in Westchester though. It counts for Westchester. Can you go to a Westchester
I'll
office?
go to Westchester.
Or you have to go to a New York City office?
You know what? That's
Oh.
a really great quote, a really great comment. The only ones I know about are through New York City. That's where we had to go.
Yeah.
It's possible that Westchester has their
Okay.
own version, but New York City, frankly, is what we cared about because we were doing the more dangerous areas on the south of the river, and we wanted to make sure we were properly permitted for that.
So Shoelace Park, that's the northernmost official launch point.
Wow. Yes.
If you could suggest a point farther north that would lend itself to kayak launching, if any, if you had to choose a place, or would you say no place, or does some place come to mind?
With respect to all the people who may
And legal disclaimer.
already know and all the laws and things, the Scarsdale section is so easily accessible and so beautiful that it is possible to enter just north of Scarsdale in the little park there and traverse through and then get out again. And frankly, you're still within an Uber ride from where you started. So it's an easy way to do a short adventure and kind of the most beautiful sections. A lot of waterfalls to portage around, but that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, oh, neat. There's a question in the chat. Where does the water for the Kensico Dam come from?
Oh, goodness. At one point, we did know the answer to this question. As I said, we are not experts.
All right.
That's a very good answer. Yeah, I wish I don't want to attempt to explain how that goes, but there are sort of about the Bronx River itself. There are river marker sites, government sites that determine the beginning of where a river is, and if you go to them, it's very it's difficult to ascertain where they believe the Bronx River begins, which is why we were challenged by it until we got a few days of rain, and then it became almost obvious to the eyes.
Interesting. If no one,
Listen, I have one more. Listen, when you got to places like where we live, right at the end of the Crestwood Lake, there's a waterfall there.
Yeah.
So maybe I missed it. So how did you get? You didn't go down that.
No, that would have been a lot of fun, but too dangerous for us. Instead,
Oh, what did we do?
we portaged. We just
Portaged, yeah, sorry, I was reading the question.
We literally just go to the shore, get out, drag it around, get back
Yep, I got it. Okay.
in. Yeah, see,
I
Mr.
mean, we
Fox,
walk
you got
along
it.
there all the time, so that's what I figured. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
The only two mills of the original 12 or 13 that were on the Bronx River are the one in Tuckahoe that's still standing, and the one in the Botanical Garden, also still standing.
Wild.
so interesting, all the history you included. Fascinating.
Ask a question.
Yes,
Go ahead,
yes, Bernie, go ahead.
All right, so I guess it was partially answered because someone mentioned Kensko Reservoir, but before there was a reservoir, the Bronx River, that was all part of the Bronx River, and I guess where you put in was right there in Valhalla at where it says the headwaters. Is that, or would that not be, or is that like a pipe that comes from the reservoir, or where would you consider where did you guys consider the headwaters? And I guess the other part was the Kensico Reservoir was part of the Bronx River at one time, correct?
Of course,
So it's
it's certainly being fed by the remnants of the Bronx River from back in the day. Currently, the official government website, which of course I can't remember the name of now, identifies a few different tributaries west of the reservoir that come together to form the Bronx River. And so they don't have an articulated spot where the Bronx River begins. With your eyes, you can visit these tributaries and see that there's no water there on one day. And then after a few days of rain, oh, there's a big puddle. And that's what we were looking for. In the book, you'll see we have the exact location latitude-wise. And that number is 41 point something latitude. But it's
Henry Field.
It's behind Pat Henry Field. If you know Valhalla at all or want to visit it, that's Pat Henry Field is where the river begins after a few days of rain.
Yes, it's a good example of if there's going to be a river there and you're going to put up a dam, it's not going to stop a river from happening. It's still gonna find its way. All the water from the ground is still going to seep up where it's always seeped up.
So would you say that sign on the Bronx River up in Valhalla that says this is the headwaters of the Bronx River that you see every time we drive up there, that's not actually accurate?
I think it's a little further north of that sign.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
In our
Thank
opinion, but we're no experts.
It looks to the eyes like it's north of that sign.
Yeah, depending on the rain of the year.
Yep.
Cool.
How long did it take you to do your trip?
Yeah, we had just had to remind ourselves of that, but it was 15 hours. About 15 hours.
Yeah, it was in the late spring, early summer, so it was really, we got on the water before the sun was fully up at all, and it was actually pretty dark when we got back onto dry land.
Yeah.
So I'm very impressed. That's quite a lot. So my friend and I, we paddleboarded the Bronx River. We took us 7 days. So we did it in steps, but I'm amazed you did it all in one day. That's amazing. Amazing.
I think the way we were able to do it is because it had been raining. There were some sections we literally were able to fly through.
Yeah. I can suggest, if for people who are interested in this, is that, I mean, my friend and I, his name is Zach Margulis, and I, who did it together this past spring, is we spent a lot of time, we didn't know about your project at all, but we think that inflatable paddleboards is a vessel of potential choice, because in the beginning you have to traverse all those, the brush and the trees and all that kind of stuff. And it's, anyways, something just, if this sport evolves, yeah. So I'll share some pictures in the chat.
All right. Matt, we're starting a trend. I don't know, it's a dangerous one, but we're starting it.
No, it's amazing. The river's beautiful. I mean, my theory with the Bronx River is that we've all seen 20% of the river. And that 80% of it is really not visible because it weaves in and out between the train line and the parkway. And so in order to see the beauty of the river, you really have to get onto it. And I was most worried as my friend and most worried that the tunnels wouldn't be large enough or the pipes. I thought we would have to crawl through some, really difficult things. But the infrastructure, which you all saw, the infrastructure of the bridges are really dramatically beautiful and sizable. I don't know. I mean, it's passable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said it. Couldn't say it any better. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Kindred spirits, my friend.
Yeah.
For sure. We'll do it again. We'll do it in the spring. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, you're talking about places that aren't parts of the river that aren't seen. As a 20-year-old having just graduated college, I was commuting on the Harlem line to the city with my father every day, commuting to work. And from the train on you could see a part of the Bronx River you probably couldn't see otherwise. And there were a bunch of car wrecks just piled up in the river. And I saw this every day on my commute. I finally wrote a letter to the editor of the New York Times. I'm like, let's get some PR. Incredibly, they published it, and the Parks Department called me and fished those cars out of the river within about a week. So you can make a difference. If no one else has spoken questions, I'm going to read off the comments from the chat before we close. Everyone good? Okay. Let's see. Carolyn McLaughlin is mentioning that the Bronx River Alliance runs canoe trips starting at 227th Street. One is a flotilla in the spring. I've heard about that. I've always wanted to go. That is a fundraiser that supports free canoe trips for community residents. And she continues, unfortunately, the river is not safe for swimming as it is still too polluted, despite Bronx residents working for 50 years to clean up the river. The worst of the pollution comes from the drains that empty into the river from Westchester towns. The Alliance has been working with the towns to locate the offending pipes and find resources to prevent the sewage flowing into the river. Oh.
Wow.
Okay, send the same questions. Judy Joint says, thank you for this presentation. I live in Scarsdale with the Bronx River right behind my house. I'm going to view the river in a new light now. Yes. M. Joanne Strauss, there was a person 6 years ago on one of my tours who tubed down the Bronx River. They had to camp out overnight. There's a video on YouTube that they took. Wow. Brian Dillon asks you, have you settled on your next adventure yet?
Hi,
You
Brian.
take that one. What do you think? Have we settled on our next adventure?
I don't think so. Not yet. We're
It'll
busy.
come. It'll come.
Okay, hopefully not during another pandemic. Matt Gilmore. Okay, this is spring 2024 Bronx River via paddleboard.
Nice agenda.
Post is his links: Bronx River headwaters to White Plains, and White Plains to Scarsdale, Scarsdale to Tuckahoe, Tuckahoe to Fleetwood, Fleetwood to East 236. This was well planned. Botanical Garden, Bronx Zoo, Bronx River, south side of the zoo to Rikers Island. If you want to paddle the Bronx River in the spring of 2025, feel free to reach out. Matt,
thanks for that. We're copying those links right now as we speak.
Super interesting. Fantastic. Well, thanks again. Thank you so much, Daniel and Katelynn, for your wonderful presentation. What a fascinating
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. We're very grateful.
So glad to have you here. Thank you to everyone who joined. Please consider going on our Eagle Walk field trip at Croton Point Park on Saturday the 15th. Please check out our website, brssaudubon.org, for future speaker programs, field trips, and other events. Our next speaker program is, I believe, March 5th. We have Julie Zickafoos, an illustrator on baby birds. Thanks again. Have a wonderful evening, and we will be putting this recording online within a couple of weeks on our website. So thanks again.
Bravo, Dan and Katelynn. Bravo.
Yeah,
We are
bravo.
grateful to you all.
Thank
Thank you.
all for the wonderful questions.
First
And
time that
inspiration.
I remember having a team presenting to us. A wonderful, synergy of having team presenters.
Hey.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so very much, y'all.
Sure. Good night, everyone.
Good night.